in your last video with quadratic formula, what we were doing is we learned how to identify A, B, and C, and then we substituted it into the quadratic formula and solved. Okay, remember we need to round any answers to the nearest hundredth, and if any problem is not equal to 0, you must solve it first. Okay, which means this is written in standard quadratic form. Okay, so what we have to do, so this is a problem like we would have had yesterday. So what we have to do is identify A, B, and C. So if you remember, A is in front of the x squared, B is in front of the x, and C stands alone. So we can identify A is 4, B is negative 13, and C is 3. So now what we need to do is we need to substitute into our variables in the quadratic formula. Remember, everything else stays the same. So we have x equals opposite of b, so since b is negative already, it would be positive 13 plus or minus the square root of b squared, remember put that in parentheses, minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. So first thing that we do is we take this inside of the square root and substitute it into our calculators. So we have parentheses, negative 13, my 1 wants to work, squared, minus 4 times parentheses 4, close your parentheses, open another one, 3, hit enter. Okay, so inside is 121, so we have 13 plus or minus the square root of 121 over, we can actually figure out the denominator first. 2 times 4, we all know that's 8. Okay, so the square root of 121, so you hit second, x squared, 121 equals 11. So here we have x equals 13 plus or minus 11 over 8. Now remember, this plus or minus means that you have two equations. So we have x equals 13 plus 11 over 8 and x equals 13 minus 11 over 8. So we would do 13 plus 11 equals, this one's 24 divided by 8, and 24 divided by 8 is 3. So one of our answers is 3. And then you would do 13 minus 11, which gives you 2. Okay, and then we would have 1/4, or if you wanted to do this, 0.25. So those are your two answers. In the next problem, notice how we're not equal to 0. So what we have to do is we now have to move our 5 to the other side by subtracting. We always need this equal to 0. So we have 2x squared plus 10x minus 5 equals 0. So we have our 2, our 10, and our negative 5 now. So we would have 2 for A, B is 10, and C is negative 5. So we have x equals opposite of B, so negative 10, plus or minus square root, B squared minus 4AC, all over 2A. So again, let's go ahead and substitute that into our calculators. So we would have in parentheses 10 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 5. Remember, your negative is down at the bottom. Hit enter, you get 140. So we have negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 140 over 4, because we're going to simplify 2 times 2. So the square root of 140 is 11.83215. We're going to round to the nearest tenth, so that's 1 decimal point. So we would have x equals negative 10 plus or minus 11.8 divided by 4. And again, because of that plus or minus, you have to split it up into two equations. So you have negative 10 plus 11.8 divided by 4, and x equals negative 10 minus 11.8 divided by 4. So negative 10 plus 11.8 equals, that gives us x equals 1.8 divided by 4. Since we already have decimals, let's continue to divide by 4. And we would say x equals 0.45. Or we can have the other one where we would have negative 10 minus 11.8 equals, whoops, that didn't work, negative 10 minus 11.8. There we go. So we get negative 21 divided by 4. And then if we divide this by 4, we get x can also be negative 5.45. So these would be your two answers. I've got one more problem for you, and then we're going to do the in-class practice. Or you're going to do the in-class practice. Again, our variable, our numbers are not all on the same side, so we have to subtract 1. And so we have 12x squared minus 5x minus 1 equals 0. So a is 12, b is negative 5, and c is negative 1. So our quadratic formula is x equals opposite of b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so again, we're going to take what's inside the parentheses here, and we're going to put it into our calculator. So in your parentheses, you have negative 5 squared minus 4 times 12 times negative 1. So 73. So we have x equals 5 plus or minus the square root of 73 over 12 times 2 is 24. So in your calculators, the square root of 73 is 8.5444. Again, round to the nearest tenth, so we have 8.5. So x equals 5 plus or minus 8.5 over 24. Because of the plus or minus, we have to separate into two equations. So 5 plus 8.5 over 24, and 5 minus 8.5 over 24. So what I want you to do right now is quickly, in your calculators, do 5 plus 8.5, and then divide by 24. And you should get 0.56. We're going to round to the nearest hundredth, 2 decimal places. Okay, now do this one. 5 minus 8.5 divided by 24. So what you should get is you should get x equals negative 0.15. So those are your answers. You have a couple problems on your in-class practice. Go ahead, try those. Make sure we check it before you move on to your quiz, which is a paper quiz.